Share the screen as well. So my name is Alan. I am the director of waterNEXT. waterNEXT is Foresight's water tech network. So we do all things focused on water technology acceleration and adoption. And one of those things is these matchmaking events, which we partner with the NRC IRAP on. And Cliff will give us a little intro in just a second there. So we run accelerator programs. That's something we're really good at. And part of the challenge that we hear from companies fairly often is, well, accelerator programs are only as good as our ability to actually have companies learn from industry and end users and hear some of their perspectives. So that's why we run these matchmaking events. These are designed to be small events, small, cozy, informal. So we've got a great session planned for you today with a few resource sector industry folks here to share a little bit of perspective, both on water challenges that they face and also how they screen and use water technologies. And then in the second half, after we've got a little bit of a panel to kick things off, we'll have an opportunity to jump into breakout rooms and have a conversation just to pick the brains of our speakers a little bit more while we have them in the room, while we have them as a captive audience. So that's our agenda. Bonita, do you want to jump to the next slide? We'll just do a couple introductions here. I already more or less highlighted that, so we can skip over. That was waterNEXT. Cliff, can we shine the spotlight on you for a second? Just give us an IRAP background.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know IRAP, and I hope you all do, IRAP is part of the National Research Council. We're a subsection of the NRC. NRC is 3,000 odd researchers scattered across 14 research centers focused on strategic research initiatives for Canada, one of which is obviously very focused on renewables and clean energy and clean tech. IRAP doesn't do any research itself. We support research done by you. So if you're a small, medium-sized enterprise out there and you are involved in innovation and you're developing some kind of technology that will benefit Canada, we can be involved. And we can be involved by either giving you wonderful advice. So, Cliff, I don't need that. I need money. Oh, yeah. So we also provide cash for certain projects is competitive. So it's a place for you to talk to in terms of your firm and your business and your innovation. You should be talking to a CEA or an ITA, and I'm an ITA at this point. If you're not, bug Bonita or Alan, they will connect you with someone within IRAP. So you're talking to someone, and we can help you with projects. Aside from that, one of the other vehicles that we have is wonderful organizations like Foresight that can deliver programs exactly like this, programs that we can't manage because we're not structured to do so. And let's see what wonderful things you can do today, Alan.
Thanks, Cliff. The only thing I wrote down there was we all need money. So everyone feel free to take that as an invitation to email Cliff after the fact. Thank you so much, Cliff, for that intro. And if you want to jump to the next slide here, Bonita. We've got a partner for this event, and unfortunately WaterSmart wasn't able to be here today, but we work with them quite a bit, providing support particularly for companies based in Alberta and around resource sector water challenges. And so they were gracious enough to provide a couple introductions for us for speakers today. For those of you who don't know WaterSmart, they're a consulting company with domain expertise in water in Western Canada. And they've got a really great bench strength of some very well-seasoned folks in the particularly agricultural water, oil and gas water, and mining water space that we lean on quite a bit through our support programs like this one. Next slide, Bonita. And one more. I'm going to do a very quick introduction of our four speakers, and then I'll pass it over to them maybe to tell us a little bit more about their own backgrounds and the organizations that they represent. And then over the course of the next little while here, we'll have a chance to ask them a few questions and hand it over as well to questions from our audience. So if you do have questions, and if you're in the audience, feel free to throw those in the chat and we will address those as soon as we get to them. So we've got JC Bourgeois joining us, water treatment engineer at CNRL, and we're very lucky to have him coming back. He's spoken at a couple of our events in the past and does a really fantastic job sort of framing some of the challenges that CNRL faces and some of the ways that they work with water technology providers. Graham Kisek from Paper Excellence, serving as the Vice President of Environment, Health and Safety and Corporate Communications for Paper Excellence. Graham, really nice to have you here and hear a little bit about that pulp and paper perspective, as well as the Vancouver connection. That's where I'm based as well. We've got Melanie joining us, and sorry, I don't have a good pronunciation of Melanie's last name. Melanie, I'll let you correct me on that later. Melanie representing ALPAC, Alberta Pacific Forest Industries. She's a water treatment specialist consultant and has worked for more than 2 decades in the oil and gas space as well. So having a little bit of that shared oil and gas and pulp and paper background. And finally, John Burley from COSIA, managing their water program with obviously a range of experience in the Oil Sands Innovation Alliance and water challenges as it intersects oil sand operations. So thank you so much to our speakers for joining us. I might hand it over to JC first, and I think we can stop our screen share and spotlight our speakers so we can see them all. JC, if you want to give us a little bit of an opening there.
Certainly. Is my camera working or?
Yeah, it's working. That's great.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, JC Bourgeois, yeah, with Canadian Natural Resources Limited. I've probably got about 20 plus years of experience in water and water treatment. I started my career back in the municipal sector, back in the Maritimes, and moved into oil and gas sort of at about the 8-year mark it was. And since then, I've been worked for Shell and now Canadian Natural out here in Alberta. So yeah, water treatment engineer, obviously, by background. Been here now at CNRL for since 2017. And yeah, primarily working on thermal in situ. I've done a little bit of mining work as well, but yeah, I don't know. Do you want me to kind of go through some of our challenges, or how do you want to do this time around?
Yeah, do you want to kick it off at a high level? High level, tell us sort of where water management, water treatment is intersecting your operations now, and then we'll dive into challenges a little bit in the next question here.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. So some of the key challenges that I guess our industry is facing at a high level are, well, I think one of the big ones is high GHGs and costs, right? And so when we get into these GHG projects, we end up with often a wastewater stream to deal with as well. So that's one of the things that we're looking into at the moment. Some of the other challenges that we've had is integrity issues with our water streams over the years. They tend to be very corrosive. They also tend to be very fouling in nature and difficult to treat. So we generate steam and inject that into the ground to be able to soften up essentially the bitumen product that we then produce back, and we recycle that water. So that tends to be one of our challenges. We have to clean that water to be able to produce steam. So like I said, it's corrosive and fouling, and so that's a real challenge. So the treatment aspect there at a high level is kind of one of our, and the main fouling parameters tend to be hardness and silica. So calcium, magnesium, iron, and then silica as well. Organics are becoming more of a concern as of late, and then yeah. So anyway, that's at a very high level, and then some of the more specific challenges that we have, as I mentioned, that flue gas treatment and associated wastewater with that. Our steam generator blowdown streams, again, very fouling. We try to recycle those to the greatest degree possible. And then we have a lot of slurry systems. Those tend to be very problematic. We add solids, chemicals, basically to treat the water, and those chemicals can be and often are lime and mag ox, and those are slurry systems that can be very problematic for our operations. The other challenges we have is around measurement and process control. So we often have upsets in our systems due to, I guess, difficulty in controlling the process overall. These chemical processes can be, somewhat finicky, and so coming up with analyzers to be able to kind of keep tabs on all of that is a real challenge. And I actually run, John's obviously very familiar with this, the process monitoring and control working group within the COSIA space. And one of the main mandate for that group is to actually identify analyzers for being able to run operate closer to process targets, so that we can, avoid those upsets and maximize production. So that's, I guess, those are some of the main challenges. Reliability, integrity, corrosion, fouling. Yeah, those are some of the main challenges, and of course, identifying technologies to address those. I'll leave it at that for now.
I think that's a great summary and a great hook. We'll chat a little bit more about those technologies in a sec. I might ask, we've got Graham and John, if you don't mind turning your videos on, then we'll be able to spotlight you as well so we can see you all. And for the companies in the room, if you have a chance, I'd suggest renaming yourself so we know which company that you were part of as well. And that'll just give our speakers a sense of who's in the room. But I'm going to hand it over to Graham next for a little bit of overview of paper excellence and where water intersects some of your operations.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So yeah, glad to be here today. Graham Kissack, I'm VP of Environment, Health, Safety, and Comms with Paper Excellence. We operate 7 pulp and paper mills across Canada, so British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and in Nova Scotia. We've also got a couple other projects underway where there's potential restarts of mills going on. So obviously our business is taking residual forest fiber and converting that into pulp and mechanical paper products for purposes of food and packaging and stuff like that. And so we are a water intensive industry. We're working hard to reduce that intensity, but nonetheless, we still use a lot of water. So some of our biggest sites are using upwards of 160,000 cubic meters per day. And that requires treatment. And so those waste streams tend to be elevated in terms of BOD and suspended solids. And most of that BOD is really coming from wood-based contaminants in terms of lignin, tannins, resin acids, phenolics, and stuff like that. So our industry was rightly targeted back in the early 90s as a consequence of the discovery of chlorinated dioxin and furan compounds. And so we were mandated basically under the pulp and paper effluent regulation to install wastewater treatment systems. And so most of those systems now have been in and operating for the last 30 years. And so if you went back 20 years ago, our challenges were very different 20 years ago to what they are today, because we're starting to see aging infrastructure. And so the reliability of those systems, the quality of the treatment, at the same time, while we're starting to change the products we make and our processes, and also, frankly, environmental regulation and expectations of the public mean that we're having to increase the level of treatment at our sites, particularly runoff from fiber storage areas, log storage areas, things like that. So what we see more and more is that we're looking for specific solutions for treatment for liquid wastes that aren't necessarily well suited to the current aerobic systems that we have in place. So these are big systems, and they operate well, but from time to time we need to get in and tweak them. so that we can make sure that we're in line with all of our regulatory obligations. So I'll probably shut up at that point. I could get into more specifics on problems, but I think that's probably a start.
Great, thanks for that, Graham. And I know I've chatted with your colleague Davis and heard a little bit about the carbon side as well. It sounds like there's some fascinating things happening, and maybe we'll dig into that a little bit later in the session here. John, I'll hand it over to you for a little bit of a COSIA background here. And you're muted at the moment.
There we go.
Perfect.
All right, can you hear me okay?
That's great.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so my name is John Brogley. I'm the Water Director at Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. I'm just going to give you a quick background on COSIA and then talk about Pathways, which is the corporation I currently work for. In the water area in COSIA, we've members have shared with each other about $600 million worth of technology over the past 10 years. We currently have active projects, about almost 90 active projects with a total cost of about $320 million. And roughly half of those are in the in situ sector, the other half in mining. So there's too many projects to try and go over. I can hit some highlights, but I will share what's going on with Pathways. And so in essence, what happened in June is the COSIA agreements, the unanimous shareholders agreement and services agreement. Our members basically scratched out COSIA and wrote in Pathways Alliancing. I'm oversimplifying, but not much. And so the entity now that I work for is Pathways Alliance Inc. And COSIA is basically a brand owned by Pathways Alliance Inc. And so what's different about Pathways versus COSIA is the major commitments being made to net zero work. And so the foundational project, which is a CCUS project to take CO2 from both mining and in situ operations and inject it to, build a trunk line, have the capture facilities, which are mostly conventional capture facilities at source, then a trunk line, then an injection facility, and a Cambrian sandstone well south of the SAOS. And so that's, I think, current cost estimate for that 16 billion. Plus there's other carbon mitigation projects for about 7 billion. So I think the total, or 8 billion. So I think the total is about 24 billion at the moment for commitments. So that's a fairly big commitment for Pathways members. In terms of the innovation work we do in COSIA, that's essentially unchanged. So the work I do in water is essentially unchanged. Is obviously focus on mitigating CO2 emissions as part of that work, but generally it's unchanged. And so, I mean, I could, if you want, I could hit a few highlights of projects, if that's all right, Alan.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So on the in situ side, of course, the most well-known one, and certainly the most expensive one by far, is the Water Technology Development Center at Suncor's Firebag site. And so they're testing, I think Canadian Natural is almost a half owner of it now, having bought other companies that were participating in it. So Canadian Natural is certainly the largest single funder of that development, and it's purely, although you can do other testing, it's meant for in situ water treatment technology. And so JC would be much better to speak about what's going on there if you're interested. And certainly some really interesting pilot facilities. So at SAIT, we have an OTSG research center that includes both SAIT and U of C and U of A working on how to increase steam quality and reduce fouling and erosion corrosion in once-through steam generators, which are by far the largest single source of steam for the in situ sector, steam generation for the in situ sector. It's almost done. It was almost done 4 years ago, and it's still almost done. A membrane, high temperature, high pressure membrane test facility at NATE, which we're pretty excited about. So that's we're expecting to do benchmark testing, this month to start benchmark testing of that, and then testing third-party membrane technology in the new year. So that's pretty exciting as well. We've also got membrane research, and again, that's focus is in situ, and we've got membrane research at U of A that's in its third term. So I'll switch to, and there's a whole bunch of other things going on, including 7 different working groups on the in situ side. What I will say to conclude the in situ overview is that the focus is mostly improving existing assets. There's not a lot of announcements you might have noticed for new in situ facilities, and so the interest 10 years ago for new technology was very, very high among in situ members, but there were a lot of expansions and new facilities planned. There's very few of those now, so the focus is really more improving existing operations. So on the mining side, the biggest single challenge we've had for 10 years is releasing treated mine waters to the Athabasca River, and that continues to be our focus. And I could spend quite a bit of time going over some of the projects there, but I think I'll just stop for the moment. Although I should conclude, I should mention, and it's important to mention, that we're about to launch a challenge with Foresight for a low energy water treatment technology, for low energy water treatment technologies for the organics and processed water, oil sands processed water for mining. So that's about to launch any day now. So I figured I'd better give you a plug, Alan.
Thanks for the plug, and for anyone on this call who's on our waterNEXT newsletter, we'll get you information on that as soon as it comes out. We've got Melanie actually joining us via phone, so we can't spotlight her, unfortunately. But Melanie, I'll ask if your audio is working, if you want to unmute and introduce yourself and your organization a little bit. Still muted. Maybe what I'll do is I'll throw out one more question for our panel, and Melanie, if you're able to unmute at some point in there, feel free to jump in. My question for the panel is just to speak a little bit to how you're working with water technologies and in particular solution providers, whether it is right now, and I think a few of you have touched on that, but also, how are you screening new technologies for your operations? So we've got a lot of tech providers in the audience, and that's always one of the questions: is how do we, what's the process like for getting new technologies tested at some of these sites and organizations? So maybe Graham, I'll let you kick that one off.
Yeah, I kind of think this is sort of there's 2 separate fronts here. One is what I would kind of call the maintenance of our business, and that's the the ongoing operations and how we're running them. And in that instance, I think it's opportunities to improve reliability of systems. And then also, I think, opportunity to reduce costs. A number of our facilities actually are using a high rate aerobic oxygen systems. And so we're having to manufacture oxygen on site, in the order of 100 tons a day or so. And so that gets very, very expensive. We've had to do that, though, because real estate is at a premium of some of these sites. So, we're always open to and looking for opportunities to reduce those operating costs or improve the performance of those aerobic systems. So new technologies that are coming along, and we've talked to a number of people about changes in the last decade, particularly. Beyond that, though, there's also sort of demand to implement new systems to meet new wastewater streams that are coming out. And so we've been through the ringer actually the last couple of years. It was a facility we no longer own that actually had some legacy wastewater ponds that were very, very high COD ponds that were heavily salt laden, and spent a number of years working with technology firms trying to find solution treatments to be able to treat those. So we do have one-off projects come up. We have one right now, actually, where we're looking at implementation of a new treatment system for a log and fiber storage area. And generally, when that comes up, we'll reach out to a handful of technology companies to see what sort of designs and technologies they would be submitting.
Thanks for that, Graham. JC, I'm going to ask you to put on two hats here. Maybe tell us a little bit about CNRL and then tell us a little bit about WTDC as well, if you want to speak a little bit to what's happening at that facility right now.
For sure, and I realized a really poor job of introducing CNRL. I kind of just assumed that a lot of people knew kind of who we were now and whatnot. Anyway, yeah, we're obviously a very large company, got over 10,000 people and almost 1 million barrels a day of production. I think it's over 900,000 now barrels of oil and gas production. We have a couple of major mine sites with different phases and whatnot going on, Horizon and Albion. We also, and that's up in Fort McMurray area, we also have a number of in situ facilities, which is kind of where I work, the thermal in situ space. And then we also have a number of conventional facilities and also unconventional facilities around Western Canada. So we're primarily operating in Western Canada. We do have a bit of overseas as well. But yeah, that's kind of us. I don't know if you want to know anything else, but you can ask, I guess, in the chat if you do. WTDC, yeah. So that's as John alluded to, we're probably, well, we were half owner in the capital. We are 1/5. Well, actually, no, it's not entirely true. We're 2/5 partner in the operating cost of that facility. And what it is a large garage, if you will, where we bring in live fluids at the Suncor Firebag site. It's a joint venture project between Canadian Natural, Canadian Natural Upgrading Limited, which is just another entity that was part of the Shell acquisition. So we ended up with two entities partnered in this, and then there's also Cenovus, CNOC, and Cenovus entered as a result of the Husky purchase, and then Suncor is the operating company. And so yeah, so those are the partners. We have this facility at Suncor's Firebag site. They're the operator. We bring in live fluids under temperature and pressure. We have a number of commodities that we bring over: produced water, emulsion, boiler feed water, etc. And then we can test water treatment technologies. I think, as John alluded to, we're kind of focused now on operational improvements and making what we have better, rather than trying to identify these groundbreaking technologies, so to speak, or game-changing technologies. You know, there's not a ton of investment these days in terms of new facilities. I think we brought on the most recent one, which was Kirby North. It was a big one. But you know, going forward, I think there'll be a lot of expansion of existing facilities, but not necessarily, new CPFs, for example. CPFs means central processing facilities. So anyway, so we're focused largely on making what we have better. So we have, we'll have at any given time at the WTDC up to 10 pilots going simultaneously. And so just very, very high level. I mean, we've done emulsion breaking chemistry trials. We've done produced water cooler fouling piloting. We're looking at steam generation, steam quality measurement. We're looking at interface level measurement. We're looking at water cut. We're looking at hardness analyzers. We've got an actual full warm lime softening process built in a trailer that we can test different coagulants and flocculants and different softening chemistries. We also have filtration pilots going on, and we've got a whole 5-year program that's taking us, well, we'll see when we finish it exactly, but currently scheduled to end in 24. We might go a little longer, but yeah, we've got a whole slew of pilots coming down the pipeline, and yeah, so we'll be picking those off sort of one at a time. We've finished 2, and we're just started up 2 more, and we're going to keep on that pace. And I'm actually the technical committee chair for the WTDC. And I've been in that role now for a couple of years. Yeah, and I can talk more about how we engage with vendors and whatnot. I know that was kind of the original question, but you asked me to speak to WTC, so I did that. If you want to know more later about how we engage vendors and stuff, happy to provide more info there as well.
Perfect. Thanks for that, JC. Melanie, we've got you on the call now, which is great. So I might hand it over to you just for a little bit of a background on ALPAC, where water is intersecting your operations, and then sort of moving into our current question, which is how are you working with technologies or solution providers? I can't hear you though, which is can't hear you. You're not showing is muted, but it might be the microphone input.
Oh, very sorry.
Perfect. That's great.
Technology fun. The Zoom didn't work, so I had to reboot. So I apologize. So I'm with Alberta Pacific Forestry Industries, and nice to see some familiar faces, JC and John. It's been a little bit, but nice to see you guys after COVID. And I do come from oil and gas for 22 years. I was actually with CNRL and in the thermal and then conventional with polymer flooding. Very familiar with COSIA and the WTC. And now in the pulp and paper side of the world. So it's great to see everyone and be participating in this. We do have water throughout our entire process. Graham really did a good overview of the pulp and paper industry, and we're a craft paper mill at ALPAC. And water really is part of all of our streams. We bring water in from the river, treat our water. It does mix with our wood, and we create pulp. We also create power, so we make steam. And we have power generation, and we also have methanol. So we have 3 products, the pulp, power, and the methanol. And from there, the water circulates within our processes and is utilized in different equipment technologies. And then it gets recycled, recovered, and treated. And we go back out to the river as an effluent, a treated effluent. So it is a kind of the heart of our system is to have water. We also have a lot of other streams of lignin and different pieces of pulp and bark that we have to deal with in the wood side of things.
And do you want to speak a little bit to sort of where do solution providers potentially fit within that? Or where are you working with technologies, piloting, testing, any kind of details?
Yeah, so a lot of our work right now and successes have been with chemical trials and changing a lot of the chemistries and trialing new products. So we also are open to other technologies and looking for ways to remove lignin, soaps, different products that stay and contaminate our different streams in our methanol, and different products that we create as well. So we're always trying to strive to recycle, reuse, and reclaim as much as we can. We do have a solids waste stream. One success technology that we have is bioreactors, which we don't have in the oil and gas side. So they actually use bioreactors to deal with a lot of our solids and our organics and waste, and then before we release back to the river. So those, technologies are needed in lots of different areas. So chemicals in the water treating, always wanting to optimize. People can connect with us and share their technologies. I think there's some technologies in the oil and gas side that we could utilize in the pulp and paper and vice versa. So it'd be good for sharing between the different industries.
Yeah, thanks for that. Always really interesting to see that cross-sector perspective as well. John, let's get you to close off for this question, and I'll plant the seed for everyone in the audience that if you've got questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We've got maybe another 15 minutes of our panel discussion before we jump into some breakout.
All right, perfect. Thanks. So Melanie, hey, great to see you again. Alan, she was affectionately known as Melanie M. When you have a last name with 3 Y's and 3 Z's in it, people are going to be hesitant to try to pronounce it. Then we had another person who worked at COSIA called Tim A for the same reason. People have known him for decades and still call him Tim A rather than trying to pronounce his last name. Anyway, so I think the question was, how do we engage innovators? And so I'll start by saying that our official way of doing that is through something we call the Environmental Technology Assessment Portal. So we've had the submissions to that have decreased recently, but certainly pre-COVID, we were getting pretty regular submissions, particularly into water. I think we've had probably more than 1,200 submissions since we set that up. at COSIA. And, needless to say, some of them, many of them don't go anywhere. And some of them do. And so that, if you want to engage, if you've got a technology that you want to gauge the interest of COSIA members with, and by the way, all of those get presented to our members. The COSIA staff don't make any decisions. They all go to our members for feedback and expression of interest. So if you've got a technology and you want to get the interest of members all at the same time, the easiest way to do that is through that technology portal. And then I'll mention a few other, I think I've already alluded to them, but certainly a few other areas where we have engaged third parties, or where we certainly can. So the OTSG research we're doing at SAIT, U of C, U of A, it's kind of a combined research program, mostly testing treatment chemicals, but other tests planned as well. So if you play in that space, I'm certainly very interested in that. I mentioned the membrane test facility, so that's a fairly that's usually an area where very large corporations play in. Although I dare say there might be some smaller innovators who may be interested in getting membranes tested, and you can certainly do that at this new test facility, pilot facility at NATE. Yeah, so I'll give you at least a couple of examples on technology that came through ETAP that is partway through the process, the scale-up process, and that the one that comes to mind immediately is H2 Nano. So it's a spin-off technology company out of the University of Waterloo. Frank Gu is the kind of the principal investigator for that original research work. He's now at U of T, and that's been getting tested at various scales for treating oil sands process water, the organics and oil sands process water, for 4 years now. The other interesting thing about that technology is it's a floating titanium dioxide catalyst. So it sits on the surface of the water and it's sunlight activated, and it's also quite good at converting methane emissions, which are common from all lakes, freshwater bodies emit methane naturally. The oil sands tailings ponds are no different. It's mostly the bacteria consuming the solvent used in the froth treatment process, because bitumen is really not very biodegradable at all. And so you do get methane emissions, and if you blanket the surface with this floating catalyst, it actually is quite effective at converting that methane, they're very, very fine methane bubbles, converting it into CO2, which is, I don't know, what's the greenhouse gas equivalent of methane versus CO2, like 40 or 60 times the greenhouse gas intensity anyway. So it's certainly an important innovation. So that's a good example of one that has come through ETAP. There's a bunch of others, of course, but that's the one that certainly the one that comes to mind. Anyways, hopefully that covers it, Alan.
That's great. Thanks, John. Does anyone have questions from the audience? I know we'll have a chance for some more informal discussion in a sec here, but just while we've got all the panelists here. Otherwise, I might put everyone on the spot with a question that I didn't pitch ahead of time, but just because it's come up in a couple connections here. The water-climate intersection. I know Pathways, you've sort of spoken to the focus at Pathways, you've sort of spoken to the methane piece. We've been chatting with a lot of our water tech companies that, repeatedly get asked by investors, what are you doing for climate tech, or what's your value proposition? So I'm curious, are you thinking, for all of you, about water through the lens of carbon mitigation or adaptation, or are these still separate portfolios for you largely at your organizations? Feel free, anyone, to jump in.
Yeah, I'll take a run at that. So, I mean, right now for our reporting purposes, in terms of our provincial and our federal carbon reporting, we're actually scoped out. So aerobic wastewater treatment from pulp and paper isn't included. And I think the carbon emissions are de minimis, but also with that said, I know they're site specific, a lot like landfill discharges. So, I think we're expecting into the future here that there'll probably be more work done on specific discharges from wastewater treatment, and likely their inclusion is coming in the future, just like we're going to see landfill inclusion in greenhouse gas reporting, which currently is not included on a site-by-site basis. So for now, carbon in our organization kind of lives between energy and environment. Water does kind of live in the environment portfolio because it's an extracted resource, and then obviously a discharge back to the receiving environment. But for us, and probably everybody here, every liter of water that we extract, whether it's from surface water or groundwater, we extract it, we have to treat it, we have to heat it up, then we pump it around a bunch, and then we got to treat it again before we discharge it. So each of those incremental activities have got a carbon footprint associated with them, and they've got cost associated with them. So it makes a lot of sense to continue to unify those portfolios and really focus on reducing, firstly, the amount of water you're using, and then secondly, using the right technologies to minimize the carbon footprint.
Yeah, I can jump in as well, Alan, if you want. I think I alluded to it earlier. We, have wastewater streams that are associated with, carbon capture technologies, and that's a bit of a focus, but that's actually pretty minor at the end of the day. The real big opportunity for us is we use a lot of gas in our steam generators, and efficient use of that gas, well, that's where the majority of our carbon emissions come from. So efficient use of that gas is a big priority. So a lot of the water technologies that we're focused on, that we're actually testing at the WTDC and elsewhere in the organization, is actually focused on reducing that gas consumption in the carbon emissions associated with our steam generating operations. So to give you an example, like we you probably have heard the term steam oil ratio, or maybe haven't, but basically that's the amount of steam we use to generate to produce oil. And so if we can reduce that steam oil ratio, that means we're using less gas to generate steam and we're getting the same production. So essentially reducing our GHG intensity. And so a lot of the technologies we're focused on are actually intending to, the value proposition, to be quite honest, is actually based on improving that SOR and reducing that gas consumption. And that, gets us closer to, obviously, net zero. We got a long way to go. That much is clear. We have, but we're chipping away at it, and yeah, so that's kind of where they intersect for us. I think is that we're really trying to identify technologies that reduce. And one of the big things that you probably heard of is solvent assisted recovery. So a lot of companies are kind of going into that space, investigating that, and trying to actually reduce the amount of steam that we need to use substantially. But in order to be able to do that, we need to have technologies that can allow us to use that process. And we need to be able to monitor the amount of solvent we're using. And of course, that becomes now the next challenge. So and there's a potential pilot lined up to actually do that. So, and that falls within the measurement space. So there's all kinds of dissecting challenges, I guess, or sorry, intersecting challenges is the term I should use. Intersecting challenges around, the actual steam generation, recovery processes, GHGs, the water, and then measurement technologies in there. And they're kind of all converging. And that's kind of what I want to highlight.
Thanks for that. And John or Melanie, does anyone want to add anything to that?
Sure, I can add. From our perspective, we keep the carbon balance, and we're working on carbon capture focus going forward. I know oil and gas is further along on the carbon capture side of things than we are for ourselves in the pulp and paper. And then we do different things. We're burning lignin and different streams. So our boilers are quite different than the ones through steam generation of the thermal in situ. So we do create our own lignin from our wood and our pulp process. And then we do add some natural gas as well. So that's something working forward. Our team's process side will be working more kind of towards a carbon capture review. And right now things are separate. And as Graham mentioned, he kind of explained a lot on the paper side of things and pulp side, how the different areas are looked at this time.
John?
Yeah, so you know, in terms of the intersection, there's certainly some of that, although as JC alluded to, many of these are incremental improvements, and these are still important, obviously, because not only do they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they reduce operating costs, and so there's a win-win there. And so examples of that certainly are the OTSG research we're doing at, say, U of C, U of A, where you know, we're looking at means of increasing steam quality, which in turn, because a few things, it reduces your GHG intensity, reduces your costs. You know, if you go from 80 to 90%, it cuts your blow down that you have to treat in half. The downside, of course, is that it risks that there's risk to the assets, the OTSGs in particular, for tube failure. So that much of the research in this space is focused on how to minimize fouling and erosion corrosion while you're doing these things that sort of are no-brainers. They reduce your costs. They allow you to produce more with the same assets and reduce your GHG emissions. So you think, well, of course, everybody's going to do that. But of course, there's, as always, the reason not everybody's at these very high steam qualities is because there's real risks to the assets. And so that's what you're trying to balance. So that's a good example of where there is intersection. Certainly more recently, as you heard from that Pathways Foundational project, it's more conventional carbon CO2 capture in this case, but that would include water, you know, condensed water from that stream. And so just starting to look, it's early stages, just starting to look at the effect of that water coming back to the process on the central processing facility for in situ. On the mining side, there's potential for a fair bit of water coming back, depending on where you're doing the capture, but typically it's the hydrogen units, because that's likely the highest concentration of CO2 in flue gas, and so that there could be a reasonable amount of water coming back there as well, which will affect the water balance. So there's areas where there's clearly overlap and work going on together on that, and then certainly areas like, for instance, you know, SMRs, there's really very little overlap there for sure. And certainly, you know, if you look at the project portfolio on the Pathways, you know, kind of foundational project and the projects that will follow that, certainly SMRs is one of those, as JC alluded to, solvent assist plus pure solvent plays, all of which are in play. Solvent assist, there's potentially a decent impact on the CPF. You know, pure solvent, that's likely a whole new flow sheet, because it's the CPF is currently a water treatment plant. If it's pure solvent play, you know, you're gonna have some water, but it's mostly solvent that you're dealing with, and so it's likely a new flow sheet. So there are certainly areas where there's overlap, and areas where there's, in the case of SMR, might be a good example of where there's very little, for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. We've got a quiet audience today, so I think let's cut to breakout rooms.
Well, I have a quick question, if
yes,
you don't
please
mind.
go ahead.
Hi there. Sorry, weird light. So I'm Alex from Century Water Technologies. We already do work with pulp and paper and some oil and gas wastewater treatment. And my question to everybody on the panel is building a little bit on what Alan was asking about, working with emerging technologies and pilots. But going beyond that, is there a clear path within your organization to move from the pilot stage to, you know, mid-scale or full-scale deployment elsewhere in the organization? Does that exist? Is it well thought, is it well developed and evolved to mature? Or is that still being built as pilot technologies become successful and you find places to fit them in?
Whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, I can certainly start. What I will say is, so I guess the answer is yes, there certainly is. There's been a track record of moving these things through from, lab scale to small pilot scale to large pilot scale to commercialization. There's certainly a track record of doing that. The downside in the oil sands sector generally is that can be, depending on the technology, it can be quite protracted, the timeline there. And so there's no question it's not like a new app where you're going to have it up and running in a month or two. These are capital intensive process, and so if it's a change that's easy to retrofit, that can get commercialized fairly quickly. If it's a major change to the flow sheet, that's much more difficult sell, and the timeline will be much more protracted. But certainly there's a track record of doing that. It's just in some cases it can be a bit slow.
Yeah, I think that's a good. There's a process. I mean, the TRL process. We work kind of from, ideation all the way up to commercialization. But just as an example, the in situ production started out with these warm lime softener technologies, whatever, 30 years ago or so. And then, as I mentioned, their chemical processes are kind of finicky, they, prone to upsets, etc. And so over the years, we kind of worked towards more mechanical type processes. And so it took a long time, first of all, to develop that process from, and actually get SAGD production going. And then to take that and move to, we moved to evaporator processes. And I would argue that if anybody was going to build a new facility, it would likely be an evaporator. I don't think too many people are going to go and build something. I don't know if they probably still get evaluated. We want to cover all our bases, but I couldn't see another brand new softening plant being built anytime soon in our industry. I would think it would likely be an evaporator process. And so we've moved that, but it took a long time because there's a lot of risk there. And as John mentioned as well, the smaller the risk, the more likely to adopt the process. And I actually want to use that as a case in point with respect to the WTDC, because the whole intent of that facility is to remove that risk from the commercial plant and actually do it offline where the risk is not there. So we can actually bring a technology from very early in the TRL scale all the way up to essentially ready for commercial operations without any risk, very minimal risk to the main operation. So we do it, and we're working actively on it at the moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to, JC, I like that example, at least in part, because certainly in Imperial, with their, Aspen, it's Aspen, right? That's the solvent assist. So their original flow sheet had, I think, a warm line or hot line softener in it. And they changed that after Canadian Natural had put in the first seeded slurry evaporator in Kirby. They changed their flow sheet completely, and Canadian Natural has shared all that technology plus all the troubleshooting they did to make it work effectively. So Imperial actually changed their flow sheet to use an evaporator, so that sort of reinforces JC's point that you're not going to build new facilities with warm line softeners. That said, a Firebag 2, it was an evaporator. Or is an evaporator. Firebag 3 went back to warm line softening. And so that's another example of how protracted it can be. It's like, oh yeah, we tried it. This isn't working all that well for us. Let's stick with what we know. And so Firebag phase 3 was a warm line softener. So it can be.
But 4 was an evaporator.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, you're right. But that's the point, is that the path can be somewhat difficult, I guess. But as you pointed out, and I think I pointed out earlier, if you could de-risk it, or if it's relatively low risk in the first place, if you can de-risk it with pilots, then it makes a big difference. But yeah, there's no question, because of the cost of these facilities, members tend to be shy of new technologies until they're absolutely sure it'll work.
100%.
And I guess that's lots on the oil and gas side. The pulp and paper is very similar, although here at LPAC, we actually have a full in-house lab. So we can do a lot of testing. It is bucket tests, and then they go and do their lab tests. They've been working with Innotech. There is, that middle stage. This is why the WTDC was built for the in situ side of things. There's that need here. So they go from bucket to the lab, and then they go live and do a full system trial, which can be good or bad, depending how it goes. So if you don't have enough excess equipment in your system, so when you put new chemicals or put new technology, we can attach it to our systems here easily. There's actually a lot of capability where they can pilot and set up things and connect to their system, but it's also live, which is what we were trying to get away from with the building of the WTDC, is try to go to the next step and not have to go live after you go from the bucket. So here they have an interim lab side of things, and they work with Innotech to then jump up towards the live test trials. So very similar, different industries, but similar kind of hole that the WTDC is filling and why it was built, to be able to test a little bit more before you go to the commercial size.
I think the only other thing I would add to what Melanie said there is that not so much on the water technology side, but the energy side. A lot of people have imagined that the pulp and paper industry would become more an industry of biorefinery, making other products beyond pulp and paper fibers and lignin-based compounds, methanol-based compounds, things like that. And we've done that in the last 15 years. And frankly, it hasn't been incredibly successful. There have been a lot of pilot systems that were implemented that 5 years later are not operating. And so I think the sector is just a little bit leery about scaling up until technology is really proven.
Thanks all. I want to throw us into breakout rooms just for 20 minutes. We'll do what we typically do. So 2 breakout sessions here. We'll do 1 pulp and paper room with Graham and Melanie, and we'll do 1 oil and gas room with JC and John. And so the companies that are here, feel free. You can choose which room you'd like to join, and you can bounce around between the 2 rooms. We'll take 20 minutes, have a little bit of a chance for companies to introduce themselves and a little bit more informal conversation, and then we'll come back at 11:20 Pacific and wrap up from there. So Astrid, go ahead and pull everyone into the breakout rooms, and then audience members, feel free to choose your own room and jump in. Thanks all. So just a few closing thoughts to wrap up. Thank you all both for joining. On the panelist side, sharing your expertise as always. It's really nice to have these small sessions where we can have these conversations, and in the breakout rooms as well, to really have a chance to connect. One of the things we committed to in our breakout room was just to share some follow-up information on the companies that were here today and facilitate some connections. So expect to hear a little bit more on that from us. Astrid, I know you've got a couple of quick poll questions to wrap us up. So if you don't mind, folks, you should see it on your screen, because data is always helpful for us, and open-ended feedback also always helpful for us on these events. But we continue to try to get industry folks together across a number of different sectors and solution providers, sometimes smaller events like today, sometimes a little bit larger. The only other thing that I wanted to mention is that we've got an event coming up next week on November 15th. Bonita, correct me if I'm wrong. This is our Climate Connections event on water and ag. So this one is going to have a little bit more of an ag sector focus. We've got some really interesting speakers, and we've got a bit more of a research audience for that one, looking at some of the earlier stage research opportunities and challenges around ag sector water issues. So if anyone's interested, you can find that on our website, or we can share that when we send out the follow-up information here. So thanks again for everyone for joining us today. Looking forward to continuing the conversation, and round of applause to our speakers. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your
much
day.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.